the great American heist, how Reagan, Trump, and their billionaire backers stole the middle class. And it's kind of a quick summary of a story that I've been telling for some time. It's, when I was in Los Angeles and San Diego talking about my new book, I mean, this is all there too. And that is that back in the 60s, from the 1930s to the 1960s, the minimum wage was enough to actually live on. The whole idea of the minimum wage, when FDR came up with it and put it into law in 1936, was that it would be a living wage, that it would lift people out of poverty. And the minimum wage, in fact, I yesterday for this article, I went to the Fed website and got all the data and then plugged it into, an AI machine and said, make me a graph out of this data, and here's the links to the Fed to get it. So it's solid, it's accurate. In 1970, the minimum wage was just a little under $5, and the amount of money that you had to make per hour to meet the middle class cost of living was $6 an hour. And this is 1970. So basically, you could live on the minimum wage. Today, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's been kept basically frozen ever since Reagan came into office. I mean, there was an increase during the Clinton years. No, I believe it was the Clinton years. But other than that, it's been frozen now for what, 13 years, 16 years, something like that. But the cost of living today, to meet the same cost of living that you could in 1970 was $6, today you need about $34, which is why Zoran Mamdani is talking about a $30 minimum wage in New York City. It just makes sense. And that's where the minimum wage would be if it had kept up with inflation. So number one, we've been screwed by Republicans withholding the minimum wage. But why? Why do they go about this? Why do they do this? Why is it that, for example, the Trump administration cut $500 million out of deliveries to food banks 5 months ago? This hasn't even been discussed. Everybody's talking about the food banks. Nobody's pointing out Trump cut $500 million out of revenue going to the food banks back in April, like as if he was anticipating this. So where did this come from? Well, back in the 1950s, you had Russell Kirk and William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater. You had these guys who were worried about the middle class getting too big. Their fear, and Buckley and Kirk both just said it out loud. I've read both of Barry Goldwater's autobiographies, and he doesn't much talk about this, but he was in with that crowd. And basically their argument was, if the middle class ever gets bigger than half of America, it's going to acquire considerable political power. And how will it use that political power? It will change society. And how will society change? Young people will no longer respect hard work or their elders. Women will no longer know the importance of their place in the home. And racial minorities will no longer accept their place in society and will begin to demand equality with whites. And if those three things happen, if any one of those three things happen, it's bad, but if all three of those things happen, it means society will end. It'll be Bolshevik revolution time, which brought communism to what became the Soviet Union, to Russia. And they were genuinely worried about this in the 1950s because the American middle class had gone from being around 10% of us in 1900 to 50% of us by the 1950s. It had never before been done in the history of the world. And this was FDR's program. This was all the stuff, that FDR did that brought us the middle class. I mean, it was, he raised the top tax rate in 1936 to 77%. It didn't require the war to do that. It was just, hey, this will fix it. It gave legalized unions in 1935 with the Wagner Act. He passed Social Security in 35, the minimum wage in 33, unemployment insurance in 35, and food stamps in 39, and provided a floor for the middle class. He literally created the American middle class out of nothing. And so these alarmist Republicans, when the 60s came, and the birth control pill was legalized in 61, and so by 64, 65, you had a full-blown women's movement. The civil rights movement was endorsed by John Kennedy, the first president to actually endorse the civil rights movement, and John and Bobby Kennedy, carried opened the door in many ways for Martin Luther King and his movement. And that's not to say that it wasn't growing rapidly with or without them. I think it was more a case of, as Bernie used to say, they saw the parade going down the street, and so they decided to jump in front of it and lift a flag. But the civil rights movement was hitting its peak in the mid-'60s, and young men were refusing to go to Vietnam and burning their draft cards. All three of the things that Russell Kirk had warned about were happening, and the Republicans at that point in the 60s thought, oh my God, the country is going to go Bolshevik. We're going communist. This is the end of America. What do we do? And what they decided to do was to reduce the size of the middle class. That was Reagan's mandate. When Reagan came into office in 1981, he was sworn in on January 20th of 1981, the first thing he did was destroy the unions. At that time, a third of us were in unions. Now it's like 6 or 7%. And Trump just pulled another 200,000 people off unionization in the federal workplace. So number one, he destroyed the unions. Number two, he dropped the top tax rate from 74% down to 27%. Number three, he killed money for higher education so that it would cost more to go to college. I mean, he just went down the list of all the things that say. He froze the minimum wage for 9 years. I mean, he wasn't even in office for 9 years, but it was frozen for that long. I mean, he blew up the fairness doctrine. And he stopped enforcing the anti-monopoly laws, the antitrust laws. So small businesses were getting wiped out. And now we've seen this. 44 years later, it used to take a minimum wage paycheck to get you into the middle class. Now it takes two, and you got to be way above the minimum wage to get into the middle class. And that's why fewer than half of us are now in the middle class. So today is election day. If you live in one of those places where the elections are happening, the fate and future of America is in your hands, because if we can show that the programs that the Democrats put together, that the Republicans consistently oppose to create the American middle class, that they're still popular and people still want them, vote. Let's make this thing happen. 17 minutes past the hour.